Empathy Training Presentation by Jenna Chambers. Introduction. Why is empathy important? Empathy is important because it helps the client and the counselor begin to build the relationship to help clear the way for the journey to begin for the client to heal. Empathy can be helpful to clients in the fact that it helps the client see the counselor as a human and willing to help them process through their grief or trauma, whatever the client might be going through. There are a few challenges to empathy, a couple being that it might be difficult for a counselor to be dealing with someone in prison who might have serious charges against them. It could also be that the client and the counselor might be struggling through similar issues, and the counselor might feel that they are struggling listening to what the client is saying. What did I learn in this course? Empathy is completely different than sympathy. At the beginning of this course, I felt that sympathy and empathy were very close in definition, and I think a great example of this is talking about how sympathy is when your client is in a hole and the counselor climbs down into that hole with the client and they continue on in that hole. The counselor takes on the problem, tries to fix the client, and essentially they end up going nowhere. The other hand with empathy is that the client is in the hole, but the counselor climbs down with them and brings them back up out of that hole. They begin that journey of climbing up the ladder together, side by side, rather than staying down in the darkness. Empathy is a humbling experience for both the counselor and the client. A lot of times people say that the client is the main beneficiary of the relationship, but in all honesty, the counselor can learn a lot from the client as they begin to form that relationship and see the struggles that the client is going through. Empathy can be one of the most powerful tools to have on the counselor tool belt. I use this statement because there's so many different things that I began to learn through these courses, but empathy is that beginning piece. It's that main piece that begins that relationship for the counselor and the client to begin to relate to one another, to feel comfortable around one another, and that opens the door for the client to want to heal, to begin to heal, and then make those steps to heal. My strengths and weaknesses. Empathy comes natural in my communication skills. On the assessment that we took earlier in this course, I was able to score very highly on relating to people and showing empathy in my relationships with others. I feel that I'm able to relate to others and make them feel heard and validated. Empathy also allows for a client to see love and understanding. I feel that also in my relationships with friends, family, and clients, I'm able to show love and understanding to them, that they feel that I hear them and want to support them and love them through whatever they're going through. There can be instances where empathy can be overused, and I think I would struggle with that specifically. An example of that would be if a client is struggling with alcoholism and you set that goal of not drinking X amount of times or drinking at all, and you make that goal, they struggle to meet that goal time after time after time, and let's say you're 3 years into this and there still has made no progress, then eventually that empathy and the second chances has to end, and that client would not be benefiting from the chances that are being given. My personality wants to fix problems and can take on a burden rather than helping a client work through a burden. This has been a struggle for me my whole life. I have always been a people pleaser and want to help people in any way I can, and oftentimes that would be me taking on their issues and problems and then being like, I'll get back to you on how to help this, rather than coming alongside the person and being like, okay, well, let's look at these things and the ways that we could help you get through this. I think that even in my job right now as a case manager, I still struggle with not taking all of the problems on myself and struggle to want to give them the space to share and to heal in their own time, rather than me just being like, nope, this is what you need to do. You need to do X, Y, and Z, and then you'll be better. Further development for empathy. Practice active listening and embrace silence. I hate awkward silences, and this has been a struggle with me in my sessions with my middle schoolers now. Although middle schoolers talk a lot, so it's not been too bad. But when there's silence, I just want to throw in a question I want to ask. And oftentimes, when I've waited, the client begins to speak again. And it allows them to feel like they're in a safe place, not where they're going to be bombarded with questions. Stop trying to have an instruction manual to fix problems. Again, this goes back to me wanting to take on all of the issues myself. I just need to trust the process, go through the steps that I need to as a counselor to help that client begin to heal and work through the trauma that they've gone through, or help manage their symptoms of depression or anxiety or bipolar, or whatever their diagnosis might be. And then learn to love others as Jesus has loved me, because ultimately Jesus shows love to everyone, and I need to have the same mindset as I go into being a counselor with my clients. A plan to communicate empathy. Listen, and more listening. I have found that this can be one of the most important things that a counselor can do when practicing empathy. A lot of clients just need to be heard. They want to say how they've been feeling, they want to share their experiences, and they want to ultimately feel heard. As a counselor, it is my job to show them that I care, to show them that I care about their past and what they have struggled through and what they are currently struggling through, to show love and understanding even when it is difficult. Specifically, I can attest to this with the fact that I used to volunteer in a maximum security prison and sat with a group of ladies and talked with them about how Jesus loved them, and a woman looked at me and said, Jesus could never love me because I murdered my child. And it was really difficult to show love and understanding through that difficult statement, but through listening to her story and her background, I was able to kind of connect the dots to see why that may have led up to her doing that and committing that act towards her child. And it was very hard to show empathy towards a woman who had murdered her own child. And a lot of times that's what we're going to be faced with as counselors, is hearing those difficult things with parents or kids and not knowing how to respond. But showing them love and that they're heard can be one of the biggest steps with that. I need to stop taking on problems and start coming alongside the client. Specifically, this has always been difficult for me. I want to take on all of the problems that people have and fix them. And I think this has been especially hard working with middle school students. And they're just kids, and you don't want them to be struggling with all of these things. And instead of going through the process, I just want to fix it manual and to help them heal quickly. And it's not right. The client needs to learn how to process through their trauma, grief, or anxiety, whatever it might be. I need to be able to overcome biases that have been in my life that could hinder a relationship with a client. In a previous paper, I had mentioned that I might have struggle with empathizing with a pastor. In my eyes, they are not perfect, but in a way close to it. Pastors have so much knowledge and they're close to the Lord, and it's easy to think that they don't have any struggles. And I would need to overcome this lens of perfection that I've put over pastors, and know that they're just humans just like the rest of us. And then I think the other thing I struggle with is parents who have abused their kids. I know specifically last week I can give an instance with one of my middle schoolers where she had disclosed that she had attempted suicide, and we called the parent to come pick her up to take her to the hospital, and the mom would not. She didn't believe that her daughter would do that. She said that she was making it all up and refused to come pick her up, and I struggled through that. There was nothing I could do. I called Child Protection Services, but to let that mom take her daughter, knowing that she wasn't going to take her to the hospital and use the protective measures, was very difficult for me. So I need to learn to begin to work through those biases that I have. Empathy from a biblical standpoint. The gospel is the definition of empathy. When I think about the gospel, I think of how we fell short of what God had intended as a perfect world. I think that the sins that I struggle with are no different than the sins that someone else might be struggling with. There is no meter in the Lord's eyes of what's worse and what's not. God sees it all as sin, and He sent His Son to die for all sins so that we might be in eternity with Him. And that's the same as being in extreme situations with clients who have struggled with murder or sexual abuse or different things like that, where, yes, those are very difficult things to deal with, but that client deserves a chance just as any other client does. They deserve the chance to work through and process what's gone on in their background. They deserve the love of Jesus just as someone who is struggling with a different diagnosis. And Matthew 9:10 says, "Then it happened that as Jesus was reclining at a table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were dining with Jesus and His disciples." Jesus didn't live a life where He was safe, where He only was with the holiest of people. Jesus was out in the world reaching people who, in the world's eyes, didn't deserve to be reached. I can also think of the instance where Jesus only went to a town to visit the man who was infected with demons. He didn't speak to anyone else in that town. He only spoke to the man who had the demon inside of him. And the man, when the demon was free, asked what he needed to do, and the Lord told him that he needed to go into the town and share what Jesus had done. Jesus cares for those who are struggling and who are sinners in all areas. Jesus also showed love to the thief on the cross, and we can look at Luke 23:40 through 43 for this, where the thief was hanging on the cross, and he told Jesus that he believed in him, and Jesus said that he would be in heaven with him. God has called me to live a life of loving others as myself. Jesus commands us to love our neighbors as ourselves, and we are pretty selfish as individuals, and we need to share that love with our clients, no matter what they might be struggling with. And I can love others through the gospel implicitly in my career as a counselor. This doesn't have to be pulling out the Bible and reading verses with my clients. This can just be listening, validating, letting them know that they are heard, just as Jesus sat down and broke bread with the sinners. In conclusion, I am definitely still learning. I'm learning what empathy is, what all it entails, but I feel like I've learned a lot of really good tools to help me on my way as I continue on my journey in graduate school and as a counselor. I believe that empathy is the most important piece of being a successful counselor, and I wholeheartedly believe that statement. Empathy opens the door for so many different ways of connection to a counselor. It allows for the client to be heard, to be validated, and that's something that a client might never have had in their entire life. It gives the outlet of a safe space to share and to begin to grow and begin healing. Empathy clears the way to being on the journey of healing. Healing can only come if empathy is there. Empathy allows for the client to feel that they're supported and loved, and it all goes back to Jesus in the way that he came to the cross, died a selfless death, and wanted to live among sinners and bring them close to him. In the same way can be done for my clients. I want them to feel loved and heard and begin feeling that they are cared for.